January 17, 1944. 30,000 feet above the frozen heartland of Germany. The air is so cold it burns. At this altitude, breath crystallizes instantly, frosting the inside of oxygen masks until each inhalation tastes of rubber and ice. The thin sunlight slices through the cockpit glass of a Messerschmitt Bf-109, illuminating particles of frozen condensation that drift like diamond dust. Below, the patchwork fields of the Reich stretch endlessly, white, silent, untouched by the chaos that churns in the stratosphere above. Oberleutnant Klaus Hartmann adjusts his throttle, feeling the smooth German engineering respond with precision. He has flown 127 combat missions. His leather gloves, worn soft by countless hours gripping the control stick, move with the unconscious grace of a concert pianist. In his headset, the chatter of his squadron crackles, clipped, confident, occasionally punctuated by dark humor. They are veterans of the Eastern Front, survivors of Malta, aces who have painted kill markers on their fuselages like notches on a gunfighter's belt. And then, through the distortion of altitude and distance, they see them, the American bombers. B-17 flying fortresses, lumbering through the sky in their rigid combat boxes, trailing contrails like the wake of slow-moving ships. Hartmann counts them, dozens, perhaps over 100, their aluminum bodies glinting in the pale winter sun. They are heading deep into Germany, toward targets that will burn and bleed and collapse into rubble. But that is not what makes Hartmann smile beneath his oxygen mask. It is what accompanies them. Clustered around the bomber formations like nervous shepherds are the American escort fighters, not the sleek, deadly Focke-Wulfs or the battle-hardened Messerschmitts that have ruled these skies since 1939, but something else, something new, single-engine fighters with long, elegant noses and a silhouette that seems almost delicate against the vastness of the European sky. P-51 Mustangs. Over the radio, Hartmann hears the laughter of his wingman, Feldwebel Ernst Becker. "Look at them," Becker says, his voice tinged with amusement. The Americans have brought their racing planes to a knife fight. Another voice joins in. "How far do they think those toys can fly? We'll chase them home before they even reach the Ruhr." The confidence is not arrogance. It is mathematics. It is history. It is the brutal calculus of aerial warfare that every German pilot has memorized through blood and experience. Fighter escorts have range limits. The British learned this over the Channel. The Americans learned it over France. You can protect bombers only so far before your fuel gauge becomes your executioner, forcing you to turn back, leaving the heavy bombers naked and alone in hostile skies. For years, the Luftwaffe has feasted on this truth. They have learned to wait, circling beyond the range of escort fighters, patient as wolves watching a herd. And when the escorts turn back, when they must turn back, because physics and fuel capacity are not matters of courage, the Messerschmitts and Focke-Wulfs descend like a collapsing sky. But today, something is different. Hartmann does not know it yet. None of them do. They are about to witness the moment when the mathematics of air warfare is rewritten in fire and falling metal. The story of how American bombers came to be over Germany in January 1944 is a story written in frozen blood at 25,000 feet. When the United States entered the war in December 1941, its doctrine of strategic bombing was built on a pillar of faith that heavily armed bombers, flying in tight defensive formations, could penetrate enemy airspace in daylight, strike with precision, and fight their way home. The B-17 Flying Fortress was designed to embody this philosophy, bristling with .50 caliber machine guns, armored like a medieval knight. It was supposed to be a self-defending weapon of industrial destruction. The theory was elegant. The reality was a slaughterhouse. The 8th Air Force began its campaign over occupied Europe in 1942, and almost immediately, the assumptions crumbled. German fighter tactics were not what American planners had anticipated. The Luftwaffe did not engage in tentative skirmishes or cautious probing attacks. They came in mass formations, striking from the sun, from head-on approaches that gave defensive gunners mere seconds to react. They used heavy cannon, 20mm and 30mm weapons that could shred AB-17's wing spar or explode its fuel tanks from outside the effective range of defensive machine guns. And most devastatingly, they waited. British fighters, Spitfires and Hurricanes, could escort bombers partway across the channel, but their range was limited. American P-47 Thunderbolts, introduced in 1943, could push a bit farther, but still not deep into Germany. The Luftwaffe commanders understood the game. They tracked the escort fighters, noted when they turned back, and then struck with overwhelming force. The result was catastrophic. On October 14, 1943, a date seared into the memory of every 8th Air Force crewman. A raid against the ball-bearing factories at Schweinfurt resulted in the loss of 60 bombers out of 291 dispatched. 6-0. Over 600 men dead, missing, or captured in a single afternoon. The sky over Germany had become a cemetery, and the bombers flew through it knowing that beyond a certain invisible line, the point where their escorts turned back, they entered what crews grimly called the shooting gallery. Bomber Command calculated that a crew had roughly a 1 in 4 chance of surviving a standard 25-mission tour. Some missions had loss rates exceeding 20%. Young men from Iowa and Alabama and New Jersey climbed into freezing aircraft before dawn, knowing that statistically, the empty bunks in their barracks would increase before nightfall. The crisis was existential. Without long-range escorts, daylight strategic bombing was unsustainable. The entire American air strategy in Europe was on the verge of collapse. And then came the Mustang. The P-51 was born from necessity and international collaboration, a hybrid child of American ambition and British desperation. Originally designed for the Royal Air Force in 1940, the early Mustangs were fast and agile but suffered from poor high-altitude performance due to their Allison engines. They were relegated to low-level reconnaissance and ground attack roles, capable but not revolutionary. Then came the marriage of American airframe and British engine. In 1942, Rolls-Royce engineers fitted a Mustang with their Merlin engine, the same power plant that made the Spitfire legendary. The transformation was astonishing. Suddenly, the P-51 possessed not only speed and maneuverability, but also the high-altitude performance necessary for bomber escort duty. More critically, it had range. With external drop tanks, a Mustang could fly from England to Berlin and back, something no other Allied fighter could achieve. By late 1943, P-51s began arriving in England in significant numbers. They were assigned to escort missions, flying alongside the B-17s and B-24s on long, deadly penetrations into the Reich. The German pilots noticed them, of course. Intelligence reports described a new American fighter with clinical detachment. Single seat, single engine, approximately 440 miles per hour maximum speed, armed with 6.50 caliber machine guns. On paper, it was comparable to existing German fighters. Perhaps slightly faster than a Bf-109G in level flight, but lighter and less heavily armed than a Focke-Wulf 190. What the intelligence reports could not convey, what no technical specification could communicate, was the revolution the Mustang represented. For the first time, American heavy bombers would not be abandoned over Germany. For the first time, the hunters would be hunted all the way to the target and all the way home. But in January 1944, this reality had not yet crystallized in the minds of the Luftwaffe. They had spent 3 years mastering the art of bomber destruction. They had developed tactics, built specialized aircraft, and trained pilots specifically to kill B-17s and B-24s. They were the apex predators of the European sky, and they did not believe that a sleek American fighter, elegant, yes, but lacking the brutal firepower German cannon, could fundamentally alter the equation. Klaus Hartmann, at 30,000 feet above Germany, believed in experience, and his experience told him that escort fighters always turn back. The attack begins as it always does, with geometry. The Messerschmitts climb, positioning themselves above and ahead of the bomber stream. This is textbook. Altitude grants both speed in the dive and the advantage of choosing when and where to engage. Hartmann's squadron splits, some diving directly at the bombers, others positioned to cut off any escorts that might interfere. The plan is to make the first pass quickly, shatter the formations, kill the lead bombers, create chaos, and then reform for a second wave. It has worked 100 times before. Hartmann rolls inverted and begins his dive. The Messerschmitt accelerates rapidly, the airspeed indicator climbing past 400 miles per hour. Wind screams over canopy. Through his gun sight, AB-17 grows larger, its olive drab paint and white stars seeming absurdly vulnerable against the emptiness of sky. His finger tightens on the trigger, and then the Mustangs arrive. They do not arrive hesitantly or defensively. They come like hornets from a burning nest. Fast, aggressive, slashing through the German formations with a violence that shocks by its suddenness. Hartmann sees AP-51 flash across his nose, impossibly close, its six-gun armament stitching tracers through the space where his wingmen had been seconds before. He brakes hard left, feeling the G-forces compress his body, graying his vision at the edges. Over the radio, the confident chatter has become something else. Warnings, curses, the clipped urgency of men who have suddenly realized the predator has become prey. Hartmann pulls out his dive, abandoning the attack on the bomber. Survival has become more pressing than scoring a kill. He looks around, trying to reorient, to understand the tactical situation, and what he sees defies his experience. The Mustangs are everywhere, not just escorting defensively, not just staying close to the bombers. They are hunting. They have pushed forward, engaging the Messerschmitts and Focke-Wulfs before the German fighters can reach the heavy bombers. And more than that, they are not turning back. They are not checking their fuel gauges and reluctantly breaking off. They are pressing the attack with the confidence of fighters that know they have arranged to see this through. For the first time in the war, the Luftwaffe is outnumbered in its own sky. Hartmann's wingman, Ernst Becker, calls out, "I'm hit," oil pressure dropping. The transmission cuts off. Hartmann cranes his neck, searching, and sees a Messerschmitt trailing black smoke, spiraling downward in the slow, almost balleted descent of a mortally wounded aircraft. He does not see a parachute. 3 minutes into the engagement, and the predators are dying. What Klaus Hartmann is experiencing, what hundreds of German pilots are experiencing in the skies over the Reich in early 1944, is not merely a tactical defeat. It is a conceptual collapse. For 3 years, the Luftwaffe has controlled the terms of engagement. They have dictated when to fight and when to withdraw. They have exploited the range limitations of Allied fighters with mathematical precision. But the Mustang has obliterated that advantage. The invisible line, the point where escorts turn back, no longer exists. More than that, the Americans have brought something the Germans did not anticipate: numerical superiority. By early 1944, American industrial production is a force of nature. Factories in California and Michigan and Texas are producing aircraft at rates that eclipse German manufacturing by factors of 5, 10, 15 to 1. For every Messerschmitt that rolls off the production line, a dozen Mustangs are delivered. For every German pilot trained, 20 American pilots complete flight school. The mathematics are brutal. The Luftwaffe is being ground down by attrition it cannot replace. Experienced pilots, men like Hartmann, who have survived years of combat, are now facing fresh American squadrons equipped with superior aircraft and unlimited fuel. The Germans are not being outfought. They are being overwhelmed. But there is something deeper at work here, something that transcends tactics and production numbers. There is a clash of ideologies made manifest in aluminum and aviation fuel. The German war machine, for all its early brilliance, is built on scarcity. Every gallon of fuel, every bullet, every replacement part is measured and rationed. Pilots are taught to conserve ammunition, to make every burst count, to husband resources because there are never enough resources. It is a military doctrine shaped by a nation that lacks strategic depth, that must win quickly or not at all. The Americans, by contrast, fight with abundance. Their pilots are trained to fire longer bursts, to press attacks even when low on ammunition, because they know that more ammunition will be waiting when they land. They fly missions knowing that if their aircraft is damaged, another will be ready the next day. They operate within a logistical system so vast and efficient that it seems almost supernatural to their enemies. Klaus Hartmann, twisting and diving to shake a Mustang from his tail, is not just fighting an enemy pilot. He is fighting an industrial empire that can absorb losses, replace aircraft, and return stronger. He is fighting a system that sees pilots not as irreplaceable assets to be carefully conserved, but as renewable components of an unstoppable machine. And he is losing. The The dogfight sprawls across 50 miles of German sky, fragmenting into dozens of individual duels. At these speeds, at these altitudes, combat is measured in seconds. A 2-second burst of gunfire, a 3-second advantage in turn radius. The difference between life and death is often nothing more than a fractional hesitation, a moment's indecision. Hartmann finds himself scissoring with a Mustang, a twisting, turning geometry, where each pilot tries to force the other into a position where guns can bear. The American is good, patient, not making rookie mistakes. Hartmann bleeds off speed in a high G turn, trying to force an overshoot, but the Mustang matches him, staying locked in spiral. For 30 seconds, they dance, metal and sweat and adrenaline, and then Hartmann's fuel warning light flickers red. It is the cruelest irony. The Americans can fight all the way to Berlin and back. The Germans, defending their own homeland, are running out of fuel. He breaks off, diving away, using precious altitude to gain speed. The Mustang does not pursue. There are other targets, other Messerschmitts still in the fight. Hartmann points his aircraft toward the nearest airfield, nursing his throttle, calculating fuel consumption against distance. Around him, the sky is full of smoke trails. Some climb vertically, the pyres of aircraft exploding midair, others angled downward, tracing the paths of crippled fighters limping toward emergency landings or spiraling beyond control. The bombers, largely untouched, continue their steady march toward their targets. After landing, Hartmann sits in his cockpit for a long moment before unbuckling. His hands are shaking, not from fear, but from the adrenaline crash that follows combat. Around the airfield, ground crews are already counting the aircraft that returned, counting the empty spaces where fighters should be parked. The numbers are grim. Of the 32 Messerschmitts that took off that morning, 19 returned. 13 are missing, shot down, crash-landed, or so badly damaged they will never fly again. Against this, the German pilots claim perhaps 6 American aircraft destroyed, maybe 8 if the uncertain claims are credited. The ratio is unsustainable. In the ready room, the mood is quiet. These are veterans, men who have seen friends die, who have attended too many funerals and drunk too many memorial toasts. But there is something different today. It is not grief. Grief is familiar. It is a creeping realization that the rules have changed, and not in their favor. Someone mentions the Mustangs. Someone else curses them. A young pilot, one of the replacements, freshly arrived from training school, asked if the American fighters really flew all the way from England. The silence that follows is answer enough. Hartmann removes his gloves slowly, inspecting the worn leather. He has flown these gloves for 2 years. They have been with him over the Eastern Front, over the Mediterranean, over France. They are softened by sweat and shaped to his hands, as personal as a second skin. He wonders, with the detached curiosity of exhaustion, if he will wear them much longer. The transformation of the air war over Europe in early 1944 is not a single dramatic reversal, but a slow, grinding collapse. The Mustang does not win the war in a day. It wins through cumulative attrition, through 100 missions, 1,000 engagements, 10,000 small moments where German pilots realize they are outnumbered, outranged, and slowly being bled to death. The Luftwaffe's loss rates climb. In January 1944, they are heavy. By March, they are catastrophic. Experienced pilots, the instructors, the squadron leaders, the men who remember the easy victories of 1940, are being killed faster than they can be replaced. The replacements are younger, less trained, more frightened. They arrive at their squadrons with barely 50 hours in type, and they die within weeks, sometimes days. The Americans, meanwhile, grow stronger. More Mustangs arrive, more pilots, more fuel, more ammunition, more of everything. The bomber streams grow larger, penetrating deeper into Germany, hitting targets with increasing impunity. Berlin, Munich, Ploesti, targets that were once beyond reach, are now struck routinely. And the German pilots, those who survive, begin to understand a truth that is bitter and final. They are not being defeated by superior skill or courage. They are being defeated by arithmetic, by production charts and fuel supplies and replacement rates. By the cold logic of industrial warfare, Klaus Hartmann survives the winter of 1944. He flies through the spring, watching his squadron shrink with each mission, seeing familiar faces disappear and new ones arrive, young and doomed. He paints more kill markers on his fuselage, but each one costs more fuel, more ammunition, more luck. On a mission in May, his engine is hit by a Mustang's gunfire. He manages to coax his crippled Messerschmitt back to friendly territory and belly lands in a farmer's field. He walks away, bruised but alive, and watches his aircraft burn. It is the last time he flies. Not because he is injured, but because there are no more aircraft. The fuel is gone. The spare parts are gone. The logistical network that sustained the Luftwaffe has been shattered by relentless bombing. By the time the invasion of Normandy begins in June, the Luftwaffe is a shadow capable of brief, desperate gestures, but no longer able to contest control of the sky. The Mustang did not destroy the Luftwaffe alone, but it was the instrument through which American abundance, industrial, logistical, human, was translated into German defeat. There is a photograph, taken sometime in mid-1944, that survives in archives. It shows a P-51 Mustang parked on a British airfield, its pilot standing beside it. The pilot is young, perhaps 23, wearing a leather jacket and a casual smile. Behind him, ground crew are refueling the aircraft, loading ammunition, preparing it for another mission. What strikes the viewer is the casualness of it all, the abundance, the sense that this aircraft, this pilot, this mission is part of an endless, unstoppable flow. There is no sense of scarcity, no feeling that every sortie is a gamble with irreplaceable resources. Contrast this with German photographs from the same period. Luftwaffe pilots standing beside their fighters look haggard, thin, older than their years. The aircraft behind them are often patched, repaired with mismatched parts, bearing the scars of too many missions and too few mechanics. The airfields are cratered by bombing. The fuel bozers are often empty. Two different worlds, locked in a struggle where one possesses bottomless reserves and the other is drinking from a well that grows shallower by the day. The Mustang becomes, in this sense, more than a weapon. It becomes a symbol of American industrial might, of a democracy that can mobilize resources on a scale that totalitarian regimes, for all their rhetoric of strength, cannot match. It is a fly embodiment of the same abundance that produces Sherman tanks by the thousands, Liberty ships by the hundreds, that feeds not only its own soldiers, but also those of its allies. To the German pilots who face it, the Mustang is a reminder of their own nation's fatal miscalculation. They were promised a short war, a swift victory, before Allied industry could fully mobilize. But the war has dragged on, and now the full weight of that mobilized industry is descending from the sky with 6.50 caliber machine guns and unlimited fuel. After the war, Klaus Hartmann returns to a Germany that no longer exists. The cities he defended are rubble. The airfields he flew from are wrecked. The Luftwaffe, once the most feared air force in the world, is a memory scattered across the charnel houses of the eastern and western fronts. He does not speak much about the war. When asked, he is polite, factual, detached. But occasionally, in the presence of other veterans, he mentions the Mustangs. "We knew," he says once, when they started appearing in numbers, that we were finished. Not because they were invincible. They weren't, but because they represented something we couldn't match. They had the fuel to fly to Berlin and back. We barely had the fuel to take off. It is not bitterness in his voice, but a kind of weary recognition. He fought with skill and courage. He did everything his training and experience demanded, and it was not enough, because the war was no longer decided by individual bravery or tactical brilliance. It was decided by spreadsheets and factory output and the capacity of nations to sustain violence over years, not months. The Mustang, in this sense, is the weapon that revealed the true nature of modern warfare. It is not the knight's sword or the warrior's spear. It is the industrial hammer, the tool of a nation that can produce, replace, and persist until the enemy is ground into exhaustion. There is a quietness to the end of the air war in Europe. By the spring of 1945, Luftwaffe resistance has collapsed. The few remaining German fighters that take to the sky are swept aside by overwhelming numbers. Allied bombers fly missions with minimal losses, sometimes none at all. The Mustangs, still escorting, find themselves with little to do but patrol empty skies. The pilots who flew those early missions in 1944, who engaged the Messerschmitts over Germany when the outcome was still uncertain, know what they achieved. They broke the back of the Luftwaffe. They made the bomber offensive sustainable. They ensured that the industrial heart of the Third Reich would be systematically dismantled from the air. But there is also a recognition, often unspoken, of the nature of their victory. They were not lone heroes triumphing through individual skill. They were components of a vast system, pilots, mechanics, logisticians, factory workers, that functioned with terrifying efficiency. Their victory was a victory of organization over chaos, of abundance over scarcity, of democratic industrialism over fascist militarism. The Mustang 6 machine guns, each one fed by 400 rounds of .50 caliber ammunition, are symbols of this abundance. The German pilots counted their shots. The American pilots fired until the threat was eliminated, knowing more bullets would be loaded before the next mission. That difference, multiplied across thousands of missions, decided the war. In the final accounting, the air war over Europe becomes a testament to the paradox of freedom and force. The democracies, so often caricatured as soft and decadent, proved capable of mobilizing violence on a scale that eclipsed the totalitarian regimes. The factories of Detroit and Los Angeles outproduced the Ruhr. The pilots trained in Texas and California overwhelmed the aces of the Luftwaffe through sheer numbers and relentless pressure. The Mustang is the instrument of this victory, but it is also a reflection. It is fast, elegant, efficient, a weapon designed not for glory but for a job. It does not embody the Wagnerian drama of the Stuka dive bomber or the brutal simplicity of the T-34 tank. It embodies American pragmatism. Find out what works, build a lot of it, and apply it until the problem is solved. Klaus Hartmann, in his small apartment in post-war Munich, sometimes hears aircraft overhead, civilian flights now, transports and airliners, but the sound still triggers something, a reflexive tension, a glance skyward. He thinks of those days at 30,000 feet, the cold and the fear and the moments when time seemed to slow and every decision carried the weight of life and death. He thinks of the Mustangs and the sky filled with burning Messerschmitts and the slow realization that courage and skill were not enough when facing an enemy that could replace every loss and return tomorrow, and the next day, and the day after that, until the ammunition ran out and the fuel tanks emptied and the airfields turned to mud under the weight of bombs. He thinks of how he mocked them once, the American escorts, believing they would turn back as all escorts did. And he remembers the moment he understood they would not turn back. Not today, not tomorrow, not ever. That was the moment the war was lost, though it would take another year for the final collapse. That was the moment when the mathematics of destruction became inescapable. That was the moment when the sleek, silver fighters with the bubble canopies and the red-tailed or checkered-nosed markings became not just enemies, but the heralds of an ending. The Mustang did not win the war alone, but it was the blade that cut the thread, the hammer that shattered the shield, the messenger that delivered the verdict. The age of the Luftwaffe was over, and the sky belonged to someone else now. It belonged to the nation that could afford to fill it with fighters, to burn fuel without counting every drop, to lose aircraft and replace them by nightfall, to fight with the terrible, patient efficiency of a democracy that, once roused, would not stop until the enemy was not just defeated, but utterly exhausted. And so the contrails faded, and the engines fell silent, and the mechanics removed the guns and drained the fuel tanks, and the Mustangs were lined up on airfields across Europe like monuments to a truth that totalitarian regimes always learn too late. Abundance, in the hands of free people, is the most devastating weapon of all.